All right, welcome and good morning. My name is Heidi Bretz. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Fellowships Advisor here at UNCG. I work in the International Program Center, and I also do work with study abroad and exchanges as the faculty-led programs coordinator. But today I am happy to introduce our panelists of UNCG Fulbright recipients. So these are folks who have applied for and received the U.S. Fulbright student grant. So I'm very excited to introduce them to you and have them share their experiences researching, studying, or teaching English abroad. So we're going to go ahead and start off with introductions, and I'll call your name. And if you could just introduce yourself, say where you went for your Fulbright, what year you went, and what your project or job was while you were there. So Maria, let's start with you first.
Hi, I am Maria Fancy, and I graduated from UNCG in December 2019. And for my Fulbright, I went to Poland, and my award was a study research, student study research grant. And I was doing a project that was researching an old manuscript and performing organ music from that manuscript.
Thank you. And Carmen?
Hi, I received the ETA grant, so I was an English teaching assistant in Brazil back in 2018. It was not required to do a side project for that, although I did do a side project, but it consisted in teaching at public universities there. So I was assigned a public university in northeastern Brazil.
Awesome, thank you. And Colin?
There we go, right. Yep, so I'm Colin Cutler. I graduated from UNCG in August of 2016 and did an ETA in Romania from 2019 to 2020, which was then cut short with the pandemic. So we were teaching in the universities there. We were not required to do a side project, but yeah, did a couple of things both in the music and art scenes around Sibiu and in Bucharest as well. So.
All right, thank you. And I know we have a little bit of a smaller group here today. So Maya, if you do have any questions or want to introduce yourself, you can do so.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself, but I'm Maya. I'm currently a senior and I'm a Spanish major, and I was interested in like watching this because I wanted to study abroad in Spain this semester, which is my last semester, but then it got canceled because of COVID. So I'm hoping there's still some way I can go abroad, whether it be studying or I would love to be a teaching assistant. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we got some great resources for you here for that particular goal of yours. So hopefully we can answer some of your questions today and then also get you on the path to perhaps applying for a Fulbright yourself this coming cycle. Awesome. So I guess kind of to start off with kind of the question, why did you apply for Fulbright? Any of our panelists want to take a stab at that one? What inspired them to apply for the Fulbright?
Okay, I can go. So Maya, actually, I got my master's in Spanish. So we were in the same department at UNCG. I graduated back in December 2017 and then started my Fulbright in 2018, so 2 months after. But I decided to apply to Fulbright because I knew I wanted to go back to Brazil because I had studied abroad there for a year during my undergrad. And I had been TAing at the university for the past 3 years, and I knew I was really passionate about teaching. So I thought the ETA grant was the best fit for me because it would allow me to continue learning how to teach and also expand sort of the type of student I could teach, because previously I had tutored ESL students, but I had never taught English to foreign language speakers. in a classroom setting. So I was excited to have that opportunity and to kind of just, learn about learn how, Brazilian universities are different. So it was a professional, also a cultural goal of mine to apply to Fulbright.
I can go next. I knew about Fulbright ever since I was an undergrad, and I always thought, oh, that's for everybody else. That's for people who are lucky or go to like big name schools or whatever. And so I just never really did anything with it. I got my master's, and then I had a long time of working. And then when I went back for my doctorate at UNCG, I started thinking about doing the Fulbright because it would be a great way to go do my research and my dissertation research and have it all paid for. And also, it's, it does put a good name on your resume, but I kind of started thinking, well, why not? And also, as during the course of my doctorate, I realized like, no, it's not some magical thing that you just have to be lucky enough to get. You just have to know how to write a grant. And there's plenty of people out there who want to help you. So that's kind of how I ended up doing it. And that made a big difference because I was able to do firsthand work with a manuscript for my research that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't gotten the Fulbright.
Yeah, and similarly to both of those, so I first went to Romania with the Army back in 2017, and always kind of wanted to, love the country. Got to spend some time, out with some of our colleagues there, and always kind of wanted to go back, not in uniform. And I've also been passionate about teaching for a long while. It's what I'm doing now at the community college here at Guilford Tech, and had always also wanted to sort of look into the ESL world as well. So prior to that, I'd gone over to England, done the CELTA, the Cambridge English Language Teaching for Adults course, sort of get that training. And I wasn't really familiar with Fulbright until I think about the time I was maybe about 2017. A friend of mine was also applying, told me I should check it out. And yeah, basically after I got the CELTA, did another master's and was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And it just sort of seemed the perfect fit. I was already in Europe, and that would be an opportunity to go back to Romania, get teaching experience, and yeah, in an ESL environment. So yeah, and like Maria said, one of the great things about it is that there are so many people who are absolutely willing to help you out on it, and it is such an open-ended thing as well, and it's really what you make of it, and there are a lot of opportunities to make a lot out of it. So yeah.
Wonderful. And just out of curiosity, did you all, were you all selected for Fulbright on your first application, or did you apply multiple times?
Mine was my first, but I was also waitlisted. So I made it through semifinalists, and then I was waitlisted, and then kind of a few months later, then I heard that I was going. So even if it's even if you get waitlisted, don't lose hope.
Yeah, I was chosen on my first try. I'm not quite sure how they measure the competitiveness. I think maybe some countries probably have like higher demands to go to. I don't know what the case of Brazil is, but I think that might vary too, kind of arbitrarily, like what, how many people are applying for a certain country versus another one,
Yeah, I also got in the first time. And yeah, one of the things I talked about with Heidi's predecessor, Patrick, was sort of like, to Carmen's point, different countries have different numbers of people who tend to apply for them versus a different number of slots. So some of them are more competitive. And Heidi can probably speak much more intelligently to this. But yeah, some of them are more competitive just because the number of people who are applying, the number of slots. In my case too, I also already had contacts in Romania. I'd worked with a public affairs officer with NATO. She ended up writing one of my recommendations. So if you can start building relationships at any point, that's always super helpful. And people who can speak to your passion and particularly to your ability to build bridges, because really that's a lot of what Fulbright's about, is building those bridges. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and kind of speaking of the competitiveness, it does really vary depending on the country. And even though Fulbright is not a numbers game, again, you want to speak to your fit really for the project that you're applying for, the position, the ETA position in the country that you're applying for. They do publish those statistics on the website. So if you're ever interested, you can go and take a look at those. But for those of you who have kind of been through this process, what were your expectations of the program when you were very first starting out? Very first beginning to look at doing a Fulbright?
I can answer that. I was really expecting it to, because I was applying for the student study research award, and I was really expecting it to be, they just really wanted to emphasize research. And then as I was going through the process, I started hearing people talk about what Colin brought up, that, they want to show that you can build bridges and be an ambassador. And that kind of caught me off guard. And I was able to turn around and prepare for that aspect in the interview, but I didn't really write that as boldly into my grant application as maybe I would have had I thought about that more. And I was kind of thinking that, oh, the ETA is the one where they want you to build bridges, but research, they just want you to do research. But that's not actually true. So they want everyone to be building the bridges and doing outreach.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be like, you have this project, we want you to go get this project, we'll be measuring the metrics of your project afterwards. It's not like that at all. Which it's much more open-ended, and you should have a clear idea, of what you'd like to do, and have concrete ideas of how you'd like to do that. But also, once you get on the ground, it's very, very much up to you, and you're allowed to be flexible and encouraged to be flexible, which is one of the things I really appreciate about my commission, particularly in allowing that. And really, it's again building those bridges and working together with your commission to sort of publicize sort of how those American and host country interactions are happening. I know our commission at least was really being in sort of the public affairs side of things, works very closely with the embassy about. But yeah, so.
And as you were kind of going through this application process, kind of thinking back to way back when you were first looking at Fulbright, what was the application process like for you? What was most helpful, and what do you wish you might have known heading into the process?
For me, if I'm remembering correctly, it was sort of similar to other applications I filled out for more competitive or like prestigious jobs, where you have like a cover letter, like a statement of purpose. So you're really, having to be, it's good to have, obviously great writing skills there and really sell yourself as best you can. Explicitly state your research interest, even if it's just ETA, but why are you really trying to go back to this country? Why are you worth sending there? Be very intentional about how you do that. And then also I had an in-person interview at UNCG on campus. There's Fulbright representatives that, are professors at UNCG that call you in. And I think there was 2 people during my interview. And I'm pretty sure that's about it as far as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
I got caught off guard because I went to Poland, and they have a very robust country commission that's very active, and they also did an interview from their end, and nobody knew what I was talking about when I started asking, because at the time, it was your predecessor, Heidi, but at the time they were saying, well, no, they don't usually ask people for that. So I just went around and started. So I went to the country commission site and started looking up who had been an American that had been over there. And I just started Googling them and finding emails and emailing people saying, what is this interview about? What can you help me? And I had one person respond and say, I can talk to you for 20 minutes. And so we did a phone call. And it was great because she was the one that told me you really need to think about how you're going to boost the Fulbright brand, which sounds it sounds kind of weird to say that, but Fulbright is interested in doing a very certain they have a mission and they're interested in carrying that out. So they do want to know, they want you to be able to talk about how you're going to help carry out their mission with what you are doing. So thankfully for her, I was able to like have a decent interview with the country commission, but that did catch me off guard. And it's not something that happens with every country. So I would say you would probably want to try to research the country as well as you can. And if you can try to talk to people that had been in that country within the last few years, that would help.
One of the really great things that I've found about the Fulbright community too is that it just like I've had people who are applying this year reach out to me, and I've reached out to people who have done it before, and we from several different conferences, and the people that I was in Romania with as well, we all stay in touch and we all help each other out with with different things like this. And or hey, somebody has a question, can they reach out to you? Somebody's going to the city, can they reach out to you? Can you get them in touch with your people? There's this network that is there, and generally very helpful folks. So that for one, I wish I'd known that, oh yeah, I can reach out to previous Fulbrighters from UNCG. And two, the other thing, and it wasn't so much with this application, but I've applied for grad school so many times, it's just sort of like now become a part of this. When you're like writing your statements of purpose and your personal statement, knowing how to, I sort of sum it up in needing to know what you've done, but also how what you've done fits with their mission, and also how their mission fits with how you want to personally develop, and then how that is also going to fit into your future plans. Okay, so sort of those four things, the past, present, future, and then the double present of how I help you and how you help me. Fitting all those into your personal statement, but particularly your statement of purpose is really important and really helpful, and sort of is a helpful framework for discussing those things. So, yeah.
Thank you. And kind of going back to that kind of ambassadorial portion, that relationship building portion of the Fulbright, that usually is a question that will throw folks for a loop, because it's not something that you're often asked, is how are you going to serve as an ambassador? What does that mean? How do you do that? So what are some of the things that you mentioned in that portion of your application about how you would work to build relationships through Fulbright?
So for me, I had a pretty solid idea about what I wanted to do as my side project. So I talked about that. I ended up interviewing young Brazilian artists and asked them about how their art is influenced by the political climate in Brazil at the time. This was the year that their latest president got elected, who's very similar to Trump in a lot of ways. And anyway, so it was kind of like the crossing of music and politics, and just doing interviews and documenting that across the country. So that was part of what I did as a cultural ambassador, I guess. And also I did a lot of guest lectures in community language centers in the city where I lived. And I will think something important to keep in mind is the extent to which you'll have opportunities to be a cultural ambassador is also, I mean, it's really depends on your drive, and not drive, but really like your ability to make connections with people, but also a lot depends on where you're placed, right? Because in Brazil, there were Fulbrighters all over the country, and there are definitely people in smaller cities who have to get a little bit more creative when it comes to fulfilling that role. And then of course, if you're in Sao Paulo or, Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, you have more opportunities, and through the Fulbright Commission there, they can definitely connect you with, I mean, a lot of contacts. Of course, in larger cities, there's always going to be more opportunities to forge those connections with anybody. So yeah, a lot is dependent. It's you have to take it upon yourself to get creative with what you're given to work with, but also a lot, maybe your side project will sort of vary depending on where you're placed and, you know, what you have to work with, you know.
Yeah, and in terms of the application to basically, if you can find ways that you've been a cultural ambassador, you know, even if you never traveled outside of the country, you know, so like when I was here in Greensboro before, you know, I started a singer-songwriter spotlight series at one of the breweries, and, you know, connected that with the newspaper and all that. So like that was, you know, one example that I gave, but just giving solid examples of ways that you have brought people together for different actions, you know, for different organizations, or that you've helped build bridges. Yeah, giving those concrete examples, and then again, showing ways that can apply, yeah, to your situation overseas, and also that you're creative in building those as well.
Yeah, and for me, in my application, I kept focusing on the public concert part of my music project. But once I actually got there, I ended up doing stuff way beyond that. And so I think anticipating that, and now when you write the application, would actually make the application stronger. I was in one of the main cities of Poland. I was in Krakow, and I had to be there because of that's where the manuscript was housed. So that did give me some more opportunities. I ended up working with the American consulate in Krakow, and I ended up doing a lot of outreach events for them, both like going around to high schools to like promote Fulbright to their students so that they could apply and come to the US. And then the other thing I did was because they hadn't had a musician in a long time in Krakow, the past Fulbright musician people had tended to cluster in Warsaw. They were so happy. They were like, "Can you do presentations on jazz?" And I'm like, "I'm researching 16th century organ music," but you know, I had taught music appreciation before. So I did know some basics of jazz, and so I put together just a short 1 hour presentation that used videos from YouTube so that it would be accessible to them again after the event. And I ended up doing that presentation about 4 times for them during the year. And if I had anticipated that in advance, I would have gone over there with a presentation, something along those lines, or just with the idea that I could prepare a presentation. And I would have reached out to different groups within Poland to say, "Hey, I'm here and I can teach this thing for your people. Like, I can teach a topic about American music that you would like to know about." Because I think even though American culture is pretty dominant around the world, we underestimate how much people want to learn more about it. And most of their contact with it is just commercial, not anyone presenting it. And so the other thing I wanted to also say is following up on Carmen's comment with where you're located. I know that for Poland, the ETAs, they were very happy if you were an ETA who wanted to go to a smaller city. Of course, that now makes it harder for you to do an outreach project. So looking up some NGOs in your country, your target country, would be helpful because you may not have an official government branch that you could work with like I had with the consulate. But I think NGOs would be, or even high schools would be another option. Just look up some high schools in that town and come up with some sort of side project that you could do to help teach their high school students about American culture and help, you know, make some cultural exchange. And that I think would make a very strong application.
Colin, were you going to add something?
No, it's all right. It was basically, well, okay, it was basically along the same lines of what Mario was saying, but yeah, exactly. Doing that prior research, you know, my application, I already knew Sibiu pretty well. I had a lot of friends there, both from the military, but also from the music and art scene. And you can also write your application in such a way that, like, you can't say, "I want to go to this city. I'm not going to take Fulbright unless you take me to the city." But you can also say, "Hey, all my connections are in this part of the country," and commission will usually send you there. So yeah, all of my connections were in Flagradar, Sibiu, and Alba Iulia, and they sent me to Sibiu, which is like right in the middle of all those. And it turns out also the university there had a lot of connections to UNCG that I didn't know about, the commission didn't know about. and I found out when I got there, which was great. So with my department at UNCG, the English department. So yeah.
Wonderful. And one last question kind of on the application, then we'll move into actually like being abroad on a Fulbright and what that experience was like for you. But what resource was the most helpful for you when you were putting together your application?
Definitely the personal statements and statements of purpose that your office already had on file. Just looking at examples of what right looks like was super helpful to me. Use those.
Wow, I had no idea that they were former statement of purpose on file that we could reference. That would have been useful had I known. But yeah, definitely take advantage of that now that you know. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, even just like looking at examples online to just make sure you have proper language and really doing a good job of selling yourself, not being overly humble about it, you know, I think is a good advice. As far as resources specifically, I can't really tell you what I used, but yeah. That's it.
For me, it was probably my doctoral committee because I was already a doctoral student at UNCG. I was already at the, I had already finished my coursework, so I was at the ABD stage, and I did the, I was doing my dissertation proposal and all this stuff at the same time. And so I had some of my committee members were really, really useful because they were, it was kind of like advice that they were stuff they also looked at my Fulbright application, and one of the things that really stuck with me was you have to connect the dots for them. Like you can't just say I'm going to you know, I'm going to do a concert of music for the local community, like and musicians know the value of that, but somebody else reading the application may not. So you have to like say it's going to impact the community in this way, you know, like, or you anticipate it impacting in this way, or it has the potential to do whatever. So, you know, just that was really helpful that my doctoral committee was there to review, especially because one of them had a good grant writing track record. So she was really, really useful for pointing out those kind of things where I needed to strengthen the application.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess moving from the application to the actual like Fulbright project, what was it like when you first arrived in those first kind of few weeks? What was it like to start the Fulbright?
Hello?
This call is from Amazon regarding your purchase of $799.
Carmen?
Sorry.
That's all right. Did you want to talk about your first few weeks in the country or what it was like to arrive in your
Sure.
Fulbright location?
Sure. So Brazil is a very diverse country. Each part of the country has like a different level of development. I was in the Northeast, so it was kind of, you know, just kind of adapting to the relatively small city. It had about 200,000 people. So it was smaller than Greensboro. And it was me and 3 other teachers there that were sent there. And we were all from different parts of the US. So kind of having to like juggle, you know, the friendship with them, the work relationship with them, and just the sort of shock of being in like a rural part of Brazil after having spent a year in Rio, which is like a totally different world. And renting an apartment was pretty difficult because not a lot of people rent for 9 months there. So it was very difficult to find a place to live at first. So that was probably the most stressful thing upon arrival, was finding where we were going to live. Yeah. And, but yeah, I was very lucky because our host professor was extremely helpful in helping us find places. He was very, very involved in helping us adapt to the new living situation. So I really appreciated him for helping, kind of going above and beyond with helping us adapt as best we could. And people were also really welcoming. It was because we were almost the only foreigners in town. people would go out of their way to really like ask us if we needed anything. So there was also something kind of comforting about being in a smaller, more tight-knit community as well.
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't so much culture shock because again, I'd spent about 7 months there before. But yeah, finding a place to live. I did have some contacts there, and you know, I at first stayed in the hostel while I was waiting for a place to come open, and then I just reached out to the university, to their international, you know, students board, and I was like, look, is there any chance like there's a, you know, faculty room or like something in dorms like I could just stay, you know, until this comes up? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, what did you ask before? I was like, okay, fine, glad I asked, you know. And, so yeah, just asking the question. The commission, your university, they're happy to help. They don't always know, you know, what you need, you know, until you come to them. Yes, just being willing to humble yourself, ask the question, and yeah. Then a friend of mine eventually found a place, you know, that was available to rent, got it at a pretty good rate, and yeah, I'd say that was probably the main adjustment for me. And then the other thing was finding. I knew some people with some of the arts organizations that I wanted to work with, but I didn't necessarily know a lot of people in the university. I was given one faculty member to work with, and I was, you know, basically teaching some of her classes, but didn't really get the chance to know many other folks outside of UNCA until I just reached out. You know, I got to meet the dean, and, you know, he said, oh, we'll have a big dinner and stuff. And finally I was like, right, there's this poet I want to talk to. Looked him up on Facebook and said, Radu, let's go get coffee. We got coffee, and he introduced me to a bunch of his colleagues, and I became like best friends with one of his colleagues, Stefan, who also did some research here at UNCG. So yeah, again, a lot of it is initiative, and a lot of it's just building those friendships, but particularly taking that initiative to build those friendships and ask those questions. So.
You know, I think it's interesting that all of us spent time in our countries before being there. I didn't actually make that clear, but I had actually been to Poland multiple times, and my family heritage is Polish. So even though I don't speak the language fluently, like it wasn't that big of a culture shock for me. Like the foods, it was like, oh, I can go eat my grandma's cooking, and my grandmother's deceased, so here's my chance to have her cooking again. So you know, so that was good. But I have a good travel story because to share. On the way over, my seatmate on the plane was a Polish man who was living in Chicago, and he was on his way to go visit his mother, and he had been living in the U.S. for over like 20 years or something. And so he wanted to know all about my project, and I talked with him, and you know, we were you know, he was speaking in broken Polish and stuff. So and we talked for hours on this flight, and towards the end of the flight he said to me, he's like, you know, this is a very difficult thing you're doing. You're going to go to another country and do research in Polish, and the language is not easy, and you know, I'm married, and he's like, your husband is staying behind. He's like, this is not an easy thing. You are very courageous for doing this. And there were so many times later where I would have moments where things were difficult, or I'd be lonely because I missed my family, you know, where I would hear his words like, you know, this is no easy thing you're doing, but it's great you're taking it on. And so actually, I was really like fortuitous that I had that. I'm not usually a talkative person on the airplane. And I was so glad I actually met this guy, because that just stuck with me throughout the whole year. Every time I got discouraged, I was just thinking, well, it's okay to feel discouraged. This is no easy thing you're doing. I don't know. That's I don't want to scare people off from the Fulbright, but there are times where it does feel difficult. And so, you know, definitely reaching out and taking some initiative to make some social contacts is important. So I kind of second what everything that Colin and Carmen was saying.
Yeah, Maria, thank you for sharing that story. It's very relatable, the struggle of things sometimes being harder than you expect, or you having like an off day. But I will say, in hindsight, doing Fulbright was one of the best, if not the best, experience I've ever challenged myself to doing. It's one of the most rewarding jobs I ever had. My students were fantastic. Everything I learned from the people I met will stay with me forever, and I wouldn't change it. I just learned so much about myself, and it was a very growing experience.
So kind of to build on that, what were some of the challenges of being abroad for Fulbright? Like you said, Mario, you had to leave family behind. Sometimes there was culture shock. Sometimes there were challenges around housing. But what were some of those challenges that maybe took you by surprise, and how did you respond to them? And what support did you have in your response?
So
I had a very, oh, sorry, go ahead, Carmen.
Oh, please, you go first.
I had a very strange thing happen. I had been learning Polish for several years on and off, working on the language because of being able to do research in it. And at first, I was doing great. Like the first month, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I can communicate. This is amazing. And then all of a sudden, I just hit a wall. And I couldn't even, I remember being like in a cafe and I could not order coffee because I could not think of the words. And that was something really basic. And I hit this wall with the language for several months, and it was really depressing. Um, and it just, I ended up I came home for Christmas because my spouse is here. But and then it's like my brain reset when I went back, so it went away. But from like mid-October or end of October, so pretty early on, for several months, I was just really struggling to communicate. And the only thing I could do was just keep going. You know, I think I started, yeah, I did start a language class, which sort of helped, but I just had such a huge roadblock with the language that just popped up out of nowhere. And that was the one thing I never ever expected to happen. And I don't know why my brain did that. I still don't know what would have I done differently to like avoid it or mitigate it. I don't know. But the thing is, you just got to keep going. You don't, you just, you know, you just do what you can and you cope. And actually, it gave me a really good understanding of what it would be like for somebody coming to the US. And like, it's just so overwhelming, you know, getting housing, you know, new foods, even grocery shopping, because they organize their stores differently. They say different things to you at checkout. You know, there's so many cultural differences that it's just like, you know, you just, if you have a struggle like that, at least it builds empathy at the very least. At least you become a more empathetic person as a result. So yeah, that was my big shock there.
I think for me, probably one of the big shocks was the bureaucracy. Romania is kind of famous for it. It's and I think it took me about. I think I finally got my visa card in December, so I'd been there for about 3 months, and that was early for some of us. So, yeah, just wherever you go, and whatever you run into, just having a sense of humor about it, and also having that network of fellow Fulbrighters who are going through the exact same thing to laugh with about it is super important. And realizing, you know what, you're not alone. Take a breath and sort of get back into that, you know, sort of comfortable emotional space, you know, where everything might be going nuts around you. That's okay. Just take a breath, look at it, laugh about it, figure out, okay, what's the next step? And also realizing that sometimes the approach might not be as linear as we might be used to, especially in an American academic environment. So then thinking about, okay, what is it that I actually need? Sometimes you need to ask the question. So for example, the paperwork that I need for my visa application, I went to my school and they're like, oh yeah, you need these pieces of paper. I was like, all right, cool. So I got these pieces of paper and I went up to the immigration. They're like, well, you need this too. And I'm like, where do I get that? They're like, from your school. So I go back and they're like, oh yeah, you need that too. I'm like, okay, cool. You could have told me that beforehand. And yeah, so just like realizing one, thinking creatively about, okay, what might I possibly need? And then really just sort of pushing, okay, what do I need? Okay, do I not need anything else? Are you sure? And, you know, yeah, just thinking creatively about what you might need, having a sense of humor about it. And yeah, finding the most helpful way to ask those questions to, yeah. Sorry, that got very convoluted because I'm now back in the trauma of that process. So sorry.
It's funny that you say that. That is, wow, so relatable. Brazil's very known for its bureaucracy, which I knew to expect given my first time there. But yeah, I mean, it's very easy, I think, to get frustrated if you're not used to that sort of thing, to get wrapped up in like complaining, like, I can't believe this. How are they like so inefficient? And then you kind of get in this like dark hole of just complaining. And it's like, no, you have to take a step back and if anything, Fulbright taught me patience, like remain calm, like you were saying, ask the right questions to make sure you're, you know, what is it, dotting your I's and crossing your T's with everything you do. And yeah, just remaining calm and patient, because at the end of the day, you're probably making it a bigger deal than it is. At the end, the grand scheme of things, it is okay if it takes a while to get your, you know, your visa. You're not going to be deported probably, you know, it's okay. Nobody's going to come knocking at your door. And just realize that this is a different culture, and part of adapting to it is, you know, remaining calm in those situations, and being as patient as you can. And also, I mean, at the end of the day, it's to your own detriment if you get too worked up about those sorts of things. And as you were saying too, Colin, like definitely having a support group to talk about that, vent about it is very great. Like I especially became close to one of the other teachers at my university. So it was nice to be able to like share those frustrations whenever we needed to. And yeah, just know that we're, you know, all in this together. And also having the Fulbright Commission from that country there to, you know, support you if you have any questions, or you know, you're unsure about something, you can always reach out to them, and they can point you in the right direction if you need to. And also relying on your host professors if you're an ETA, you know, to ask them anything you might need to know. So yeah, I mean, really just knowing who to ask the right questions to, knowing that you have a support system because you're there on Fulbright. So overall, you know, I think it's always better to not get too worked up about anything, because you're in a very safe situation in the country, given that you're going through with Fulbright. So that gives you a sense of sort of a cushion of security, and just focusing on that and being patient is the most important thing you can do, I think.
And if someone says something that you don't understand, especially when it comes to a piece of paper, ask the question. I learned what an adeverinça was. But yeah, they're just like, oh yeah, the adeverinça. I was like, cool, what's that? They're like, well, you need two of them. I'm like, great, from whom? So yeah, you could just ask them the question.
Wonderful. And I do want to be mindful of our time. We have about 12 minutes left. So I think I'm going to ask kind of one last official question, then we'll open it up to questions from our audience. So thinking through kind of what life has been like post Fulbright, what sort of opportunities or experiences have you had that kind of built upon that Fulbright? What doors has it opened for you? What's your life been like post award?
Okay, so I'll start if you want. For the year after I got back, I was working at a company here in town called Honda Aircraft Company. And having Fulbright was definitely extremely helpful for that job. It gave me like sort of a name dropping, you know, oh, she's a Fulbrighter. Like that's something I've run into so many times, like applying to jobs in the past couple of years. People are like, oh, she did Fulbright. Like it gives like an added layer of like prestige that people point out. So I when I got back, I worked in the marketing and communications department, focused on the Latin American market. So being a Fulbright gave me the cultural on the ground knowledge of dealing with people from that country, which was the biggest market for the company. And obviously I spoke Portuguese, so dealing with media from Brazil was really easy for me, or dealers, just understanding the culture and speaking the language fluently was extremely helpful. I wouldn't have gotten that job had I not, done my Fulbright and known Portuguese, since Brazil was the biggest, market for them in Latin America. So it was more important than knowing Spanish in that job. So yeah, I mean, and even like just in everything, like I was saying, like I've recently been starting a Rotary club here in town, and it's funny, like talking to the Rotary community here in Greensboro, they're always like, "Oh, Carmen's a Fulbrighter. Carmen's a Fulbrighter." It's sort of like the one thing they point to. It's funny. It's like, okay, well, you want to associate with me with that, that's great. But it's funny how it creates a sort of community, and it's sort of like a buzzword, that will only be a good thing to have on your application. Yeah.
Yeah, so my little brother went to the Air Force Academy, and when I came back from the Fulbright, he was like, Colin, when we were at the Air Force Academy, it was like everyone wanted to get a Fulbright because it was like this such prestigious thing. He's like, but you got a Fulbright. I was like, that's fine, that's fair. But no, it is it is prestigious. It is also accessible. But yes, it does have that, as Carmen said, an added layer of prestige, which can be very helpful. Also, I think with the student Fulbrights, you also get 1 year of non-competitive eligibility for federal jobs as well. So that's something to consider if that's something that you're looking into. Of course, the Fulbright is also associated with the State Department, similar mission. So if anybody's interested in going that route, that would be something to look into. Also, you get close access. You end up going to some of the embassies as well. So if you want to get involved and or making connections that way, especially for that field, that'd be a very helpful thing. For me personally, I came back and stayed in Eastern North Carolina for the beginning of the pandemic, and then moved back up to Greensboro last fall, got a job up at Guilford Tech, and found that a lot of my students, probably about half of my students last semester were, one had moved to America, and two, a lot of them, were speakers of English as a second language. So I think that the experience of teaching at a university level, speakers of English as a second language in Romania was super helpful, then when it came to my students here. Also, I highly recommend the CELTA program. It's a great program for teaching ESL, especially to adults. And it really makes you think about sort of the learning process and about learning a second language. If anybody, especially if you're interested in the ETA route, I do recommend that as a helpful tool. And I think it's just a good pedagogical tool as well. So, yeah.
For me, it was an immediate effect of I could finish my dissertation and graduate. So when I came back, I was pretty much focused on that. And now I teach part-time at UNCG. But I will say that if you want to, it's kind of also up to you to leverage the Fulbright when you get back. Like if you don't keep trying to make some connections or kind of stay active with it, like no one's going to come running to your door just because you did the Fulbright. But when you make reach out to someone and they see that on your resume or whatever, then it does open doors. Or you might use some of the Fulbright has an alumni network, so you can, if you're active in that, you can use it to make connections and stuff too. But for me, there's just like, I got to finish my dissertation, and now I'm starting to think about, okay, what else am I going to do to follow up on it? But until December 2019, I was kind of occupied. So.
And sort of one other
go ahead.
thing as well too. Yeah. So when I was over there, like I mentioned, some of the teachers at ULBS had actually studied here at UNCG, done some research here. I also got involved with an international theater festival there, doing music, and a poetry festival as well. So one of the things I've continued to stay in touch with those folks as well, and trying to get some of the North Carolina poets that I know, as well as some of the British poets that I know, and musicians involved in those too for the future. Once COVID's done, people are actually traveling again. But that's one of the connections that I've been doing that too. So thinking when you're in these positions of how can I make connections between my home institution and these institutions that are working with Fulbright in this country is a super helpful thing. And again, it's about building those bridges. So.
Thank you all. And I'm going to open it up. Maya, did you have any questions for our panelists?
As of right now, no, I don't. I also have to go because I have something at 12. But
no worries.
everything that y'all said was really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. And you can go ahead if you are interested in applying for the Fulbright for this next cycle. Just go on to fellowships.uncg.edu and there's an inquiry form you can fill out. And that's how we'll get connected to continue the conversation.
I think I had.
Oh, you might have actually.
Yeah, that's how I knew about this. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Been there, done that. Check that off your list. All right. Wonderful. We'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And I was going to say, if we wanted to just kind of wrap up our recording video with kind of one last round robin question, and then I'll thank y'all for your time and let you go to your lunch. But I guess, what would be your one piece of advice for students who are applying for the Fulbright?
I'd say just do it. It doesn't hurt to apply, and the worst that can happen is someone says no. And even if you get it and something else comes up, you can say, hey, you know what, not right now, and that's okay. But yeah, I do think that going through the application process is very relevant to, it's this exact same process as grad school applications. It's very similar to grant writing as well. It's just a good skill to have. And learning to tell your story is a really, really important part of the application process, and it's really, really applicable to a lot of other things. Okay, so one, it's not going to hurt you to go through that process. So just apply, try, and if you get it, go ahead and have fun. So.
Yeah, I definitely second everything Colin said. That was great advice. Also, just remember that not only are you going to this country to experience it and learn about it, but you're also tapping into a whole network of people that are Fulbrighters that can be good, connections to have later when you get back for searching for jobs. I've definitely kept in touch with a lot of people from my cohort, and that's been really wonderful to see what they're doing now, have on my radar, like maybe I can apply to the job they're doing. So it just really opens a lot of doors and possibilities to know people that are doing the same program as you, and then come back and continue doing interesting things that could possibly also be up your alley to consider applying to in the future. So yeah, it really opens a world of possibilities. And like Colin was saying, I mean, the worst that can happen is you get a no, and you went through a great, writing exercise of trying to apply, which will definitely be useful for future applications. So, and if you get it, definitely seize the moment,
Yeah, those are pretty much great comments from everybody. And I would the only thing I would add is just like maybe just think about the little things. Like, I don't mean get caught up in details and get derailed, but what I mean is like, it can sound so overwhelming to be like, oh, I got to do this Fulbright application, but just, what's a few sentences you can write about what you'd like to do, or, just break it into small pieces. And even when you are there, if you get it and you're over there, just think about the small things, because you're going to be wanting to like take in the whole country at once, and that's just not possible. Even 9 months is 9 months is not enough. And so just focus on like what little small thing is that you can actually do, or it was within your control, and then from there it just builds, whether we're talking the application or getting to know people in new country or when you get back. All of those things, just taking it tiny pieces at a time.
Wonderful. So with that, I'm going to formally thank you and end the session. So thank you all for sharing your experiences. And this has been so wonderful. We hope that your thoughts and reflections will be helpful to the next generation of Fulbright applicants.